Hey there, welcome. I'm here to help you relax tonight. So before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It really makes us feel like the global community it is. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's begin our evening together. Story 8. The Silent Choir of St. Ignatius. The cold in St. Ignatius was a living thing. It didn't just bite at your skin, it seeped into your bones, a damp, ancient chill that the weak winter sun could never hope to thaw. I'd taken the job as the church's weekend caretaker not for the meager pay, but for the silence. After a year that had torn me open and left me hollow, a bad breakup, a layoff, the suffocating weight of my own failures, I craved the quiet, the emptiness. I thought a place like this, dedicated to an absent God, would be the most empty and quiet of all. I was wrong. The first time I heard it, I was polishing the dusty pews. A faint, melodic hum, so low it was almost a vibration. It seemed to come from the walls themselves. I stopped, holding my breath, and it was gone. I dismissed it as the wind whistling through a crack in the old stone or the distant groan of the city. But it came again the next Saturday, and the next. It was always the same, a dissonant, harmonic hum that felt both ancient and utterly alien. It wasn't music. It was the memory of music, the ghost of a sound. Then the notes started appearing, slips of aged, yellowed parchment tucked into the hymnals. They contained fragments of sheet music, notes scrawled in a frantic, ink-blotted hand. The notations were wrong, impossible. Clefs twisted into strange sigils, notes stacked upon notes in ways that made my head ache to look at. The first one was simply placed on the organ bench. The second was folded inside the confessional. The third was left on the pulpit, weighed down by a single, desiccated rose. No one else had keys. The priest, Father Malachi, an old man with milky eyes and trembling hands, assured me of this. "You are the only one, my boy," he'd wheezed. "The doors are locked. The alarm is set. It must be your mind playing tricks. This old place, it gets to people after a while." But the hum grew louder. It no longer faded when I held my breath. It coiled through the nave, a serpent of sound, felt more than heard. It was a choir of whispers, singing a language that had no words, from throats that had no air. And the notes kept coming. They began to appear in my small caretaker's apartment adjacent to the sacristy. One was on my pillow. Another was slipped under my door while I slept. The final note was different. It wasn't just music. Words were written beneath the staves, in that same frantic script. "The silence is not empty. It is full. We are full. Join us. The choir is missing a voice." I went to Father Malachi again, the note clutched in my shaking hand. His study was a cave of shadows and the smell of decaying paper. He took the parchment, his gnarled fingers tracing the impossible notes. For a long time, he was silent. The only sound was the frantic ticking of an antique clock on the mantel. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "On the altar," I lied. I couldn't bring myself to tell him it had been pinned to my bathroom mirror with a thorn. He sighed, a long, rattling sound. He didn't look surprised. He looked tired, defeated. St. Ignatius was built on older things. He began, not meeting my eyes. The stones for the foundation were taken from a ruin that stood here long before, a place of different worship. They say the original builders heard singing as they laid the stones. They thought it was a miracle. And was it? I asked, my throat tight. He finally looked at me, and his milky eyes were full of a pity that chilled me more than the cold ever could. No one knows what it was. The first caretaker, a man named Alistair Finch, he became obsessed. He started transcribing the sounds he heard. He said the choir was teaching him a new kind of prayer. He vanished in 1923. All they found were his journals, filled with this. He gestured to the note in his hand. This madness. And his robe, folded neatly in the center of the nave. He just left? Not exactly, Father Malachi said, his gaze drifting to the window overlooking the graveyard. His journal entry for that day reads, "The maestro has tuned my instrument. Tonight, I take my place in the eternal chorus. My flesh will be my final note." They never found a body. The hum seemed to swell in the room, pressing against my eardrums. It felt like agreement. "Join us." I left his study, the old priest's warning hanging in the air like incense. Leave, son, while you still can. Some silences are not meant to be filled. But it was too late. The silence of St. Ignatius was already inside me. That night, as I tried to sleep in my small apartment, the humming was louder than ever. It wasn't coming from the church anymore. It was coming from the walls of my room, from under my bed. It was a physical pressure, a resonance that made my teeth vibrate. I got up, driven by a terror I couldn't name, and went into the church. The moon shone through the stained glass windows, casting fractured saints in pools of bloody light. The nave was empty, and yet it was full. The air was thick, humming with that silent, desperate music. I walked down the center aisle, my footsteps echoing in a space that felt suddenly vast and hungry. I stopped before the altar. Lying on the cold marble was a new sheet of parchment, and on top of it, a small, sharp knife from the sacristy kitchen. The note contained only a single, complex rune that looked like a twisted musical staff. I didn't need to be able to read it. I knew what it was asking for. A voice, clear as a bell and cold as the grave, whispered directly into my ear. I was utterly alone. Every instrument must be opened, it said, to let the music out. I ran. I fled the nave, the whisper clinging to me like a cobweb. I slammed the door to my apartment and shoved a chair under the handle, a pathetic barricade against something that clearly didn't need doors. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, out of rhythm with the low, constant hum that now permeated everything. Sleep was impossible. The hum was a needle threading through my brain, stitching fear into my thoughts. I spent the night huddled on my bed, clutching my knees, listening, waiting. The voice did not return. The notes did not appear. This was worse. The anticipation was a sharper torture than the event itself. The next day was Sunday. A handful of elderly parishioners attended Father Malachi's sparse service. I watched them from the shadow of the vestibule, their mouths moving in silent prayer. They seemed small and fragile against the immense, humming silence of the church. I saw the way their eyes flickered towards the dark corners. They felt it too. They'd just learned, long ago, to call it God. After they left, Father Malachi approached me. He looked older, more shrunken. "You're still here," he stated, his voice flat. "I have nowhere else to go," I replied. It was the truth, in more ways than one. He nodded slowly, understanding in his clouded eyes. "Then you must learn to listen properly," he said. "Do not listen for the melody. Do not try to understand the words. That is how it gets in. You must let it wash over you. Be a stone in its stream." It was useless advice. I was already drowning. That night, the hum changed. It coalesced. The dissonant harmonics began to resolve into something almost structured. It was still wrong, still alien, but now it had a pattern, a purpose. It was gathering itself. I found myself standing at the door to the church, my hand on the cold iron handle. I hadn't consciously decided to go in. It was a pull, a magnetic compulsion. The hum was a leash, and I was the dog. The inside of the church was different. The moonlight was stronger, illuminating motes of dust that danced not randomly, but in time with the humming. The air shimmered. At the far end of the nave, the shadows behind the altar seemed deeper, thicker. They pulsed. I took a step forward, then another. My fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was being overridden by a terrifying curiosity. The voice had called me an instrument. What song would it play? I was halfway down the aisle when I saw them. Figures. Faint, shimmering outlines in the pews. Dozens of them. They were translucent, etched in silver light, their faces upturned towards the pulpit. They were the congregation, and they were humming. Their mouths were open in perfect, silent O's. This was the choir, the silent choir of St. Ignatius. At the pulpit, another figure stood, more solid than the others. He was tall, gaunt, dressed in the tattered remains of a caretaker's robe. His head was thrown back, his hands raised as if conducting the air itself. This was the maestro, Alastair Finch. He turned his head slowly towards me. His face was stretched in a rictus of ecstatic agony. His eyes were not eyes, but two black voids that seemed to drink the light from the room. He lowered one hand, extending a long, bony finger pointed directly at me. The humming of the spectral choir swelled, filling my skull, vibrating in the marrow of my bones. It was an invitation, a demand. The figure of Alastair Finch mouthed a single word. "Sing." The sound that escaped my lips was not my own. It was a raw, ragged note, torn from a place deep inside me I never knew existed. It was a note of pure terror, of desolation, of a loneliness so profound it felt like the first and last emotion in the universe. It was hideous. It was the most honest thing I had ever done, and it fit. My terrible, broken note slid perfectly into the dissonant harmony of the choir. The void-eyed maestro nodded, a gesture of gruesome satisfaction. The shimmering congregation in the pews turned their ghostly faces towards me, and I saw it then, not malice, but a desperate, eternal yearning. They weren't monsters. They were prisoners, and they were so lonely. They wanted a new voice to share their endless performance. The hum wasn't a threat. It was a binding, a sonic cement holding their spirits fast to this cold, stone place. My note, my fear, my pain, it was just another brick in the wall. The maestro began to conduct again, his movements more vigorous now, drawing my note out, weaving it into the tapestry of their misery. I tried to stop. I clamped my mouth shut, but the sound didn't come from my lungs or my vocal cords. It was being pulled from my soul. It was a scream on a puppet string, and he held the other end. The pressure built inside my head. The world began to warp. The stone pillars of the church seemed to bend and sway in time with the music. The stained glass saints wept tears of black glass. The air grew thick and syrupy, each breath a struggle. I was losing myself. My memories began to unravel, feeding the song. The pain of my breakup became a sour, descending scale. The shame of my failure at work was a sharp, staccato rhythm. Every private grief, every hidden insecurity, was extracted and translated into a sound that fed the ancient, hungry choir. This was the tuning Father Malachi had mentioned. Alastair Finch wasn't just the conductor. He was the tuner. He was breaking me down, making me resonant, preparing my spirit to take its permanent place in the chorus. I fell to my knees on the cold stone floor, my body convulsing as the note was ruthlessly drawn out of me. My vision started to fail. The shimmering figures of the choir grew brighter, more solid, while the physical world, the pews, the altar, the cross, faded into a dull gray haze. I was being unmade. My past was becoming music. My present was becoming music. Soon, all that would be left of me would be this single, eternal note of despair. Through the thickening air, I saw the door to the sacristy swing open. Father Malachi stood there, holding a heavy, old Bible not like a holy book, but like a shield. His face was a mask of grim determination. His eyes were clear now, blazing with a fierce light I had never seen in them before. He didn't look at the spectral choir. He didn't look at the maestro. He looked directly at me, on my knees, my mouth forced open in a silent scream. "Fight it, boy," he roared, his voice cutting through the oppressive hum like a clap of thunder. "Your song is your own. Don't you give it to them." The maestro turned his void-like eyes towards the old priest. The humming of the choir faltered, just for a second. A flicker of rage distorted Finch's ecstatic expression. In that fraction of a second, the leash loosened. I gasped, sucking in a breath of real air. My note choked off. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The maestro let out a silent shriek of fury. The spectral choir flickered, their forms destabilizing. The entire church seemed to groan in protest. Father Malachi began to speak, but he wasn't reading from the Bible. He was chanting in a low, guttural language that was older than Latin, older than the stones themselves. It was a language of banishment, of walls, of silence. Each word he spoke was a hammer blow against the humming presence. The shimmering figures in the pews began to waver and fade, their silent mouths closing one by one. The dissonant music didn't stop, but it was pushed back, compressed, forced away from the center of the nave. The maestro, Alastair Finch, took a step towards the priest, his hands clawing at the air. But Father Malachi stood his ground, his voice growing stronger, more powerful with every syllable. He wasn't a frail old man anymore. He was a bastion, the last keeper of a seal he should have reinforced long ago. The struggle was invisible but immense. I could feel it in the air, a war of pressure and sound. The old magic of the land against the older hunger of the thing that inhabited it. I saw my chance. While the maestro was distracted, his will focused on the priest, the connection was severed. I was free. The compulsion to sing was gone, leaving behind a hollow, aching silence in my chest. I scrambled backwards on my hands and feet, away from the altar, away from the fading choir, towards the door. I looked back just once. Father Malachi and the ghost of Alistair Finch were locked in their silent battle. The priest's face was pale, beaded with sweat, but his voice never wavered. The maestro's form was beginning to unravel at the edges, streaming away like smoke into the shadows from which he came. Then I was through the door, into the cold night air. I didn't stop running until I was blocks away, collapsing in a gasping heap on the sidewalk. The city's normal, mundane sounds a glorious symphony in my ears. I never went back. I heard later that Father Malachi was found dead in the church the next morning. The official cause was a heart attack. They said he died peacefully, a Bible clutched to his chest. I know the truth. He died holding the line. He died to give me a chance to run. I found a new apartment, a new job, a new life. I surround myself with noise, radios, traffic, the constant hum of electricity. I am afraid of silence. Because sometimes, in the deepest part of the night, when the city is unusually still, I think I can hear it. Faintly, from very, very far away. A single, dissonant note. A note of terrible, lonely yearning. And I know, with a cold certainty that chills me more than any winter wind ever could, that it's my note. They kept a piece of me, and the choir is still waiting for the rest.